In this video, we're going to look at the differences between the 1.0.1 blank activity project template that we started using for the action bar example this week and the new blank activity template that comes bundled in Android Studio, the new version. So I'm going to start by saying File, New Project, and my application name is going to be Marshmallow Action Bar, like so, and that's going to go in my Android projects folder. I'm going to go ahead and start with API level 10, and this time I'm going to select blank activity with the green action bar, which is the new version. I'll leave all of these the defaults, and I'll let the project get created. So Gradle will take a little time. Okay, so that didn't take too long. I'm going to go ahead and squish this down a little bit so I can see both things. And the first difference is in the old version, under Layout, we just started with Activity Main. And Activity Main has a relative layout, and this is where our content goes for our app. So you have an action bar, and then you have a client area where your user interface goes, this relative layout. And that all goes in one file, activity under main, and then you have one XML file for each separate activity you have in your app. In the new version, there's actually two layout files for each activity. So activity main now looks like this. So let's look at what's going on here. It's pretty complicated, but basically this whole thing represents your entire app, not just the client area where we were adding stuff before, but the entire window that your activity goes in, including the action bar, is represented in this XML file. So at the top level, we have a coordinator layout, and inside of that, here's the layout information for your action bar. And it has an app bar layout that has a theme, and inside that is a widget, which is a toolbar. So in the new way of doing things, your action bar is just a type of toolbar, just like any other toolbar that you can use in your program. You can have 5 toolbars or 6 or however many you want. But one of these toolbars, if you want, is inside of an app bar layout, and that's going to be at the top of your screen. And then the next thing we see is that it's including the layout content under main. And this is where your actual content goes. So everything that we've been doing up till now in activity main is now actually going to be in this content main. So this is the client area of your activity. And then you also get, by default, this floating action button. So it's giving you an email icon inside of a floating action button that's going to be on top of your content. And then when you touch it, something will happen. And we'll see that later on. So your activity main now is sort of a high-level layout of the entire activity, including the action bar. Content main is now the content area of your activity, the stuff that comes below the action bar. And by default, you start with the same Hello World text view as you did before. So the layout is now different. The important thing to remember is the stuff that you would have put in activity main before now goes in content main. And then the styles are a little different as well. So if we look at activity main, we see that there's some theme information on the app bar layout and also a pop-up theme associated with the toolbar. So what are these two things? Well, this theme here covers the action bar, and this theme here covers that little menu that pops up when you touch the 3 dots for the overflow menu. So you get a little pop-up menu with some items in it that have overflowed from the action bar. This is the theme that controls that. Now let's look at the styles. So by default, you actually have two styles.xml files. And we'll talk about this in a couple of weeks. But basically this open paren with v21 after it says that this styles.xml, this applies if you're running on an Android device that's version 21 of the API or later. This one without a open parens or any qualifiers, this is going to be true for any API that you're running on. So let's start here and look at styles.xml. And what we start with is an app theme that covers your entire app. And by default, it's based on a light style, light theme with a dark action bar. It has some colors that affect the action bar. Then you also get this style for apptheme.noActionBar, and that's what you get if you're running an activity that doesn't have an action bar. You have a style for appBarOverlay. This is the style for the app bar. And then, once again, a style for the pop-up overlay, which covers that pop-up menu you get when you touch the three dots. So let's look at no action bar. No action bar is basically the same exact thing as the default app theme, except that window action bar is false, so there's no action bar, and window no title is true, so there's no title. Now these styles are referenced both in activity main, where they affect the app bar layout and the toolbar, and they're also referenced in the Android manifest, just like before. So the application can have a theme. This one's using app theme, and then each activity can also have a theme. And this one, by default, is using the style app theme no action bar. So the activity itself doesn't have an action bar. But what it does have is a layout that has a toolbar inside of an app bar layout. So that might take a little thinking about, but what's really going on is this isn't really an action bar. This is just a toolbar that looks like an action bar. It's at the top of the screen, it behaves like an action bar, but it's not an action bar as far as the API is concerned. And that's controlled by this theme, no action bar. So the real action bar that you've been using before is now completely hidden, and instead you have this toolbar that's serving the same purpose. Now, the code is a little different too, so let's look at the Java code here. And some of the imports are different because now we're not using action bar activity anymore. We're now using appcompat activity. So this is a new class that was introduced with Lollipop. Instead of extending main activity extends action bar activity, now you're going to be extending appcompat activity, which is compatible. And the big difference is that action bar activity has been deprecated. So that means the developers of the API are discouraging you from using action bar activity anymore. It still works, but at some point in the future, the API may change in a way that makes action bar activity not work anymore. That's what deprecated means. It means that it works right now, but you're discouraged from using it, and support for it might be dropped in the future. Appcompat activity is now the new thing to use instead. So this Uncreate method, this part is the same. So all of this code is the same as it was before. But now in addition, since there isn't an action bar anymore, since we just have a regular old toolbar view instead, we need to tell the operating system that we're going to be using this toolbar as the action bar for our app. And that's what this code does. So what it does is it goes in to the activity main layout, it finds whatever view has the ID toolbar, gets that view, and then sets that view as the support action bar for the app. So that's what these two lines of code do. They find the toolbar and set it as the action bar for the app. Then we also have this new code, which handles user clicking on the floating action button that you get by default. And we'll talk about this more later on. I could delete this here, and I could also delete this from the XML, and that would cause the floating action button to be completely removed from my project. But at least for the main activity one, I'm actually planning on using this in the project, so I'm going to leave it here for now. Then this Uncreate options menu, this is the same as it was in the previous project template, and this on options item selected, that's the same as well. So all of the new stuff here is in Uncreate, and it has to do with setting the support action bar and also supporting clicking on the floating action button. So one other minor difference is that in previous versions of Android Studio project templates, inside of Drawable, there was an IC under Launcher that had the icons for your app. And in the new version, this has been moved, the icons have been moved to a Mipmap folder instead of Drawable. So now you start with an empty Drawable folder and your app icons are under Mipmap. Not a big difference, but just something to be aware of. You're still going to be putting all of the PNGs and icons and other drawable resources inside of this drawable folder. So that's a brief rundown of the differences between the new project template and the old project template. Let's use this to port our action bar example over to Marshmallow.